Next, we will now talk about the book A Journey to the West. Yesterday, I introduced the preface to this fascinating work. And there's actually another section above this preface. This will appear later on. After I finished writing it at the time, I asked Khenpo Tsultrim Lodro to take a look at it. He thought it was pretty good and said, when the Guru's memorial ceremony is held, at the 20th anniversary memorial ceremony, it would be better to distribute it to everyone then. Later, our supervisor for this year, Khenpo Dzongdru and Khenpo Wangchuk Tsegyal, as well as 3 Khenmos, after they saw it, they all felt that it would be good to distribute it at this year's Nirvana ceremony. It would be better to hand it out then. Later on, several Khenpos and Dharma teachers from the Nirvana ceremony group also thought it was necessary. This year, they volunteered to take on this task. Later, we invited Tulku Tenzin to go through it from beginning to end, checking for any typos in the Tibetan text. During the process, he noticed that some parts might not be easy for others to understand. There were a few sections, according to his own perspective, drawing on his previous experience writing the biography of His Holiness, he offered extremely valuable suggestions. Then, taking all of the above into account, I made some further adjustments later on. Around July, I revised it again, incorporating these processes. Some of the later content was slightly fine-tuned, but there were no major changes overall. That's basically how it was. This is in the preface, and perhaps in the future there will be similar things. When I finished this preface in my hometown, I completed it inside a blessed cave of Guru Rinpoche. This is part of the introduction. So today, as we begin, I'd like to talk a bit about A Journey to the West. In fact, it consists of 10 chapters. That is to say, it is told in 10 stages. At the beginning, there is a preface and also a background section. At the end, there is a return chapter, as well as a postscript and an appendix. So that's roughly how it is structured. At the beginning of the background section, I paid homage to the Supreme Guru of boundless compassion, which is the most definitive way of making prostrations. Then I mentioned His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche, the wish-fulfilling jewel, and all his travels to Europe and America in 1993. I summarized these into 10 chapters for narration. At that time, I also prayed to the Guru, the Yidam, the Dharma protectors, and the Dakinis, asking for their blessings. Because this also involves some Vajrayana teachings and some very profound instructions. So I was also concerned that the Dharma protectors might not be pleased. Therefore, I made requests to them. During the process, it seemed that I didn't feel not only any displeasure, but in fact, there were many blessings as well. It was just like that. Today, I would like to give a brief introduction. At the very beginning of this, there is 3 years of confidential work. This is relatively simple to talk about. In 1990, when His Holiness, the wish-fulfilling jewel, went to India, at that time, His Holiness Penor Rinpoche kept inviting him to the West to spread the Dharma, and His Holiness also agreed at that time. In the beginning, they discussed it quietly without telling me. I wondered what it was that they were always discussing. But later on, in my recollection of the time gone by, I also mentioned a little about it. His Holiness also roughly told me about it. Mainly, he said that maybe next time, if there was a chance, he could take me along. But you have to keep it a secret. You yourself also like to keep things confidential. Actually, we didn't have any secrets that couldn't be told. But some things can only be carried out if they're kept secret. At that time, I also felt quite happy on one hand. But on the other hand, there was a bit of pressure. But no matter what, as for the academy, I was put in charge of it. As for some external contacts and such, Khenpo Namdrol was put in charge of those. Whenever we did all sorts of things like this, including things that were different from now and then, like passport verification and also some travel expenses, including when we needed to look up some related materials. Now it's especially convenient. You just go online or use your phone to ask, and you'll get an answer right away. Back then, you had to rely on printed materials and books to find out about different things, including things about foreigners, Westerners, their personalities, customs, and ways of handling things. In many aspects, it was quite a challenge at the time. Besides this, as everyone probably knows, when His Holiness traveled, a lot of preparation was needed, including Dharma texts, ritual implements, and things like tape recorders. Because in 1990, when His Holiness went to India, when he arrived in Nepal, he basically couldn't see any text at all. So we came up with a solution. First, we recorded it on a tape recorder. Then His Holiness would recite and explain at the same time. At first it was a bit unfamiliar, but later, whether it was for empowerments or teachings, it became convenient. At that time, whenever I had some free time myself, I also recorded a portion. There was also another portion, for example, the flight of Garuda and Chetsun Dzogchen. As for these, I had Khenpo Rinpoche do the recordings. Once Khenpo Rinpoche felt, "Why are you recording all this? Is it because His Holiness is going somewhere else?" At that time, I didn't really know how to answer, so I used some clever words to change the subject. Of course, he is also a very wise person. When I asked him about it last year, he said he had more or less already figured it out. So, in this particular way, we actually managed to successfully keep it a secret for quite a while. At that specific time included not only the United States, but also France, as well as Canada, and the UK, the Netherlands, and so on, including Japan and several other places. But those invitations were also sent in the form of letters. At that time, there wasn't even a fax machine in the whole Sertar County. Every time those letters arrived, I would interpret them in different ways. After interpreting them, I would privately discuss with His Holiness, including some arrangements regarding the timing and introductions to some of the Dharma centers. Actually, quite a lot of work was done, but some things I don't think it's necessary to talk about here. There were also some matters related to this. Actually, at that time, I felt there were still many of those invitations. At the time, I collected all of them in one place. I thought that if I organized them later, it would be great, but I didn't expect that later, when a thief stole some Buddhist statues, those invitations were also stolen along with them. So this is rather regrettable. Overall, during those 3 years, I basically didn't tell anyone about it. And I made preparations in all aspects. From 1990 to 1993, there was still plenty of preparation done. As for why it was kept secret at the time, on one hand, maybe as we later realized when we were about to leave, we still encountered all kinds of situations. On the other hand, there were also some unfavorable factors. So sometimes when doing anything, it's better to do it in a more confidential manner, and only make it public when the conditions are fully ripe. This is quite important. This is the first layer of content. As for the second layer of content, before going to the United States that year, His Holiness held the first Amitabha Grand Dharma Assembly. The second time was in Daofu. The third time was held in Shinlong. Throughout His Holiness's life, there were 3 especially grand Amitabha Dharma Assemblies. This should be recorded in the biography. At that time, His Holiness was 60 years old, even younger than I am now. First in the spring at the Buddhist Institute. He taught the Exploring the Nature of Mind, Treatise of the Precious Vajra Garland. I really want to translate this work. Actually, the doctrines discussed within it are basically the same as those in the Entering the Way of the Great Vehicle. They are truly, truly excellent. In the past, Khenpo Tsoltrim Lodro asked me to translate this, but life is very short. I don't know if it will be possible in the future. That spring, His Holiness taught this instruction from Mipham Rinpoche. During that period, actually where our current Vajrasattva shop is located, there was the first Han Chinese Monks Sutra Hall. It was called the Han Monks Exoteric and Esoteric Sutra Hall, and it was inaugurated and consecrated. At that time, His Holiness, the wish-fulfilling jewel, also personally came there and gave us an empowerment. He also taught some instructions from the natural freedom of the nature of mind. He taught for several days. Afterwards, His Holiness was about to leave the Buddhist Institute to spread the Dharma in places like Shinlong and Luhuo. During this period, he had Tulku Dicha and Khenpo Depa give the entire monastic community of the Institute the empowerment and teachings of the sutra which gathers all intentions. Then His Holiness went to Luhuo and Ganze, as well as Baiyu, Shinlong, and Daofu. At that time, the most important thing His Holiness did was to give them the Nyingtik Yabji empowerment. Regarding His Holiness's Nyingtik Yabji, one was in 1984, when he gave the Nyingtik Yabji empowerment. At that time, I had not yet arrived. Later, in 1989, he gave the empowerment in Daofu. That was the first time I received this empowerment. Afterwards, His Holiness, for the third time, also gave the empowerment either in Shinlong or in Daofu. There was also the Kala Chakra empowerment. Actually, the Nyingtik Yabji and the Kala Chakra empowerments are extremely, extremely important. In His Holiness's entire life, the 2 most important empowerments were these 2. So in recent years, we have also worked very hard for the elderly Rinpoche to give everyone the Nyingtik Yabji and Kala Chakra empowerments. This too, according to the Dharma friends, whether it's the empowerment itself or the content of the transmission, must be carried through from beginning to end with care. This is a very important and significant matter. Actually, as for this, when the conditions are ripe, it is extremely rare and precious. On our side, basically, we can consider it completed. At that time, I myself was 31 years old and had just begun in front of Tulku Dicha to receive half a month of empowerments. Later, in front of Khenpo Depa, while the transmission was being given, the conditions for me to leave had basically ripened. At that time, I also gave teachings to the Han monks here on the commentaries of Finding Rest in Meditation and Finding Rest in Illusion. About a month later, I think I had finished teaching one of them, but the other one was not yet finished. At that time, His Holiness returned. Then the Amitabha Dharma Assembly began. During the Amitabha Dharma Assembly, the last sentence in His Holiness's prophecy was, "All those who form a connection with him will be able to be reborn in the pure land of ultimate bliss." So based on this, at that time, during Sagadawa, the 4th month of the Tibetan calendar, nowadays we hold the Vajrasattva Dharma Assembly, but back then it was held at that time. Later it changed to the month of the descent from heaven and was held then. At that time it lasted for 15 days. Once this news got out, there wasn't the convenience of the internet like we have now, but the local Tibetans nearby, there were probably fewer Han Chinese, but people came from all directions in great numbers. There are various accounts regarding the number of people. Some biographies say it was 200,000, some say 700,000. There are all sorts of figures. But as I say here, it was several 100,000 who came. On the grasslands of Luoruo, everyone really did set up tents there at the time. White tents everywhere, which you can also see in our photos. They covered the sky and the land, stretching across the mountains and fields. There truly were a huge number of people present at that time, especially when His Holiness was giving teachings. Everyone offered katas, and perhaps I was a bit inexperienced back then, but it really looked like waves rising one after another. As for the sound of chanting mantras, it was like the voices of 1,000 dragons gathered together. The momentum was overwhelming. The whole scene was still vivid in my memory now, and it's hard to describe. It was truly, truly magnificent. At that time, my father and mother as well came from home. I asked them to personally come and attend an Amitabha Puja. They came as well. And one of my uncles came carrying a gun on his back. Then Khenpo Depa and I tried to think of a way to see if we could destroy his gun in the charnel ground. At first he wouldn't listen. Later, after trying all sorts of ways, he reluctantly agreed. But afterwards he really regretted it. He told many people that Khenpo Depa and the other one had taken his gun away from him. He said the two of them were the real bandits. Sometimes his virtuous roots were rather weak, but later on he turned out to be all right. At that time, His Holiness also gave everyone the Amitabha empowerment. He also taught the sutra on the contemplation of Buddha Amitayus, together with Mipham Rinpoche's teachings on the Pure Land, at the same time required everyone to recite 1 million Amitabha names. If you have not committed the offense of abandoning the Dharma, and have not committed any of the 5 heinous crimes, then you will definitely be reborn in the Pure Land of ultimate bliss. So this kind of call to action is in the whole world. It was very moving, deeply touching, and truly heart-shaking. At that time, Master Menchok also gave everyone the Avalokiteshvara empowerment and transmitted the 37 practices of a bodhisattva. Through this Dharma assembly, the Pure Land Dharma Assembly, we have continued it up to now without interruption. So now, during the Pure Land Dharma Assembly, everyone should rely on this kind of auspicious connection to be reborn in the Pure Land of ultimate bliss. It is very important to give rise to this aspiration. Actually, before His Holiness went to the West, there was such a karmic connection. As for this, earlier because it happened to be at that time, so I am briefly recounting some of these causes and conditions here. Therefore, this Dharma assembly should allow countless people to form an extremely auspicious connection with the Pure Land. Through this connection, many sentient beings can be reborn in the Pure Land of ultimate bliss. That concludes today's introduction.
Jupun Zonen Droa Droa Sho Bandangara Badna Asadorda Bandangara Badna Asadorda Bandangara Badna Asadorda